Episode 1 begins with a shocking twist in the Russian media landscape. For years, the Kremlin has maintained a tight grip on the flow of information, presenting a carefully crafted image of strength, control, and inevitability. State TV, newspapers, and online platforms have all echoed the same lines: that Russia was winning, that the West was weak, and that Ukraine's resistance would soon collapse. Yet, unexpectedly, cracks appeared in this fortress of propaganda. A well-known Kremlin-aligned commentator, usually loyal to the script, allowed words to slip that no one thought possible. He declared that the war was essentially lost. His tone was not triumphant, not defensive, but resigned. It was as if he himself had grown tired of maintaining a lie that no longer made sense. The audience, stunned, reacted with silence at first. Social media channels buzzed within minutes, cutting clips of his words and spreading them far and wide. For Russians who relied solely on official broadcasts, this was the first time they heard defeat spoken openly. What made the moment even more jarring was the way he framed it, not as a betrayal, not as a call for resistance, but as a grim recognition of reality. He admitted that Russia had exhausted its resources, that Ukraine had proven stronger and more resilient than expected, and that the international support for Kyiv had ensured Moscow could not achieve its goals. It was a confession wrapped in inevitability, and it pierced the illusion many had grown accustomed to. The aftermath of this statement was immediate and intense. Other propagandists scrambled to contain the damage, attempting to backtrack, to reframe his words, to insist he was misunderstood. But the damage was done. Once the thought entered the public sphere, that Russia had lost, it could not be easily erased. The people, even those who still supported the war, began to question: if the voices closest to the Kremlin admitted defeat, what did that mean for the future? Military bloggers, who had long been critical of tactical blunders but careful never to challenge the overall narrative of victory, seized on the slip. They began to echo doubts more boldly, pointing to battlefield failures, logistical shortages, and collapsing morale among troops. The myth of inevitable Russian triumph started to unravel from within, and it was the Kremlin's own machinery that dealt the blow. Episode 2 builds on this unraveling, showing how the initial shock transformed into a larger narrative of betrayal and weakness. Once one outlet broke the silence, others followed, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Suddenly, discussions that had been taboo began to seep into mainstream conversation. Could Russia truly win? What was the cost of continuing? Families of soldiers, long silenced or ignored, found new courage to speak out, citing the propagandists' words as proof that their sons and husbands had been sent to die for nothing. The Kremlin's response was confused and inconsistent. Some officials tried to paint the statement as enemy disinformation, while others lashed out at the commentator himself, branding him a traitor. Yet silencing him outright only confirmed to the public that something deeper was wrong. The very fact that he had not been immediately erased from the air suggested he was not alone, that perhaps others within the system shared his doubts. Internationally, the incident made headlines. Western analysts interpreted it as a crack in Putin's carefully maintained image of total control. If propaganda itself was faltering, it suggested divisions within the elite, a loss of confidence, and possibly even preparations for shifting blame away from the president. Ukrainian voices seized on the moment, broadcasting it back into Russia through unofficial channels, amplifying the sense of doom. Meanwhile, ordinary Russians, long accustomed to swallowing official lies, now faced a dilemma: believe the words of someone they had trusted for years, or cling to the comforting fantasy that victory was still possible. The tension was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that the war had reached a turning point not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of those who had been told they were destined to win. What began as a single unexpected statement had blossomed into the Kremlin's worst nightmare: propaganda turned against itself, and the truth slipping out for all to see. Episode 3 shifts the focus to the ripple effect of the propagandist's confession inside the Kremlin's own corridors of power. Within days, whispers began circulating among political insiders that Putin's inner circle was alarmed not only by the message itself but by the speed with which it spread. The Kremlin's propaganda machine had always been its strongest weapon, capable of reshaping reality for millions, but now it seemed to be slipping out of control. Meetings were convened late at night, and the central question was not about battlefield tactics but about information management. Who had allowed this message to slip through? Was it an act of sabotage or simply fatigue by those forced to repeat the same lines for years? Intelligence agencies were ordered to investigate the commentators' loyalties, while state censors scrambled to erase traces of the broadcast from official archives. But it was too late. The footage had already been mirrored, downloaded, and shared across countless platforms. The Kremlin found itself in a situation it had never faced. The betrayal had not come from foreign media or opposition voices but from within its own carefully controlled apparatus. This shook officials to the core, as they realized that even those tasked with maintaining the illusion of victory were no longer able to believe it. The public response added to the Kremlin's anxiety. Across provincial towns, people began gathering in small groups, not for protests, which remained dangerous, but for conversations in markets, bus stops, and factories. The words, "Russia has lost," spread like a whispering campaign, not shouted but quietly repeated. Teachers, workers, and even some local officials privately admitted that what the propagandist had said matched what they already suspected. For many, it was a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear that acknowledging defeat could bring punishment, but relief that someone had finally spoken aloud the truth everyone had been circling around. Military morale continued to erode, with soldiers at the front sending messages back home that seemed to confirm the sense of futility. Commanders struggled to motivate men who felt abandoned, and desertions increased. The propaganda slip had done more damage than any Western weapon. It struck directly at the will to fight. Episode 4 captures the Kremlin's desperate attempt to reverse the narrative and restore control. A coordinated campaign was launched across all state media channels, aiming to drown out the confession with louder declarations of strength and defiance. Patriotic songs blared, footage of parades and missile launches filled screens, and Putin himself appeared in a choreographed address, insisting that Russia was stronger than ever. Yet the delivery felt hollow, rehearsed, and forced. Viewers who once absorbed such spectacles with pride now watched with skepticism, their minds clouded by the recent admission. Instead of restoring confidence, the propaganda blitz revealed just how shaken the leadership truly was. Social media users mocked the spectacle, pointing out the absurd contrast between bold declarations of victory and the growing reports of retreats, shortages, and casualties. The Kremlin also moved to punish those connected with the original confession. The commentator was quietly removed from his position, though no official statement was made. His disappearance became a story of its own, fueling speculation that others within the propaganda system might also harbor doubts. Rumors began to swirl that some broadcasters were refusing to go on air or demanding clearer instructions, fearful of accidentally crossing the invisible line between acceptable optimism and forbidden honesty. Western media seized on these stories, framing them as evidence of a regime in decay, where even loyal servants no longer knew how to maintain the illusion. Meanwhile, Ukraine capitalized on the psychological chaos. Officials in Kyiv highlighted the Kremlin's faltering propaganda as proof that Russia's leadership was cracking from within. Messages were broadcast directly to Russian soldiers, urging them to surrender rather than die for a war their own leaders had already admitted was lost. Some soldiers listened, choosing capture over continued fighting. This development terrified the Kremlin even more than protests or sanctions, because it showed the loss of control over both the narrative and the army. The combination of public doubt, elite panic, and battlefield demoralization set the stage for a deeper crisis. The words spoken by one propagandist had transformed into a weapon far more destructive than any missile. They revealed to the world, and to Russians themselves, that the foundation of Putin's power, control over truth, was beginning to crumble. The Kremlin could silence individuals, but it could not silence the echo of those words, that Russia had already lost.